Okay, so we have this and this lecture codes and week 3. Now we will be just starting our week 4 because this is our is this our week 3? Yeah, this is our week 3. Very much. Sorry. Right. So this is my week 3 document, and you might find it like there are a few maybe different things for you, but anyhow, it's more or less the same thing that we have discussed. Just please confirm me when you guys see that we have talked about in this week's lecture. Till now we have talked about these different things. If you have had a look the chance to look at that one. So we have talked about that what is this like strings, and we have talked about this object type of strings that we have. Strings can be can be used as objects, and if we talk about objects, it means that they will be available as the methods will be available inside that one. And then I talked about some of the arrays related functions. We talked about the push function and the pop function related to arrays, and we saw that how you can just create arrays. So can anyone please confirm that these were all the things which I have discussed in our part 1, and so I will just continue from that. Then for the regular expression, if you have seen that regular expression, I have not directly discussed over there with the previous sections as well. Rather, what I have done is that I have just given them a file for that one. So now for the regular expression, there is a video file that I shared with that one. So it's there. By the way, it's here, and I will be sharing this with you as well for the regular expressions later on. But anyhow, this was the. So yes, how many of you had a chance to look at the part 1 of this one? Like this one where I have discussed for each, I've discussed for off loop, and I've discussed that these are all the kind of the things that we can do. How to just go through all the collections. If you have a collection, how would you just go through that collection? So all these things we were discussing over here. And then I created this NEE file for the NEE section. But again, you might all the things that we have discussed in this NEE, they were all, as I said, they were all available in our script file as well. Right. So what we'll do today, that we will be just creating maybe a new file today, and we would like to talk about few important aspects that are left from our the third week of study. There are a few important things that I want to discuss over here, and those things will be used in your code and in your when you will be just coding. There are lots of things that would be used. So what I'm doing is that for today, it's for because this will be lecture for everyone. So I'm creating a file with today's date, May27.js. So we have this JavaScript file that we'll be working on. In notes, I've just made two interesting things related to string literals. Have you gone through this string string literals or backticks that I have talked about over there? That you can just give a backtick and you can just string interpolate over there, and expression can be interpolated. And I will be using that quite often in our program, and I would show you over here as well that what we are doing. So I'll start with a question, and that question is that again, in the first week of lecture, I have talked about the missing parameters, missing parameters, or if the return type is not explicitly mentioned, what happened. We have just talked about all those kind of things. So just for my understanding, just have a quick recap of that one. I told you that we create functions in, and as you are making in your assignment 1 as well, we create functions over there, and what we do is that functions might be looking for certain parameters, and what we have discussed that. So for example, if I just want to say console a plus b, something like that. So now I can provide these two parameters to this function greeting when I'm calling. But if you remember that we have talked about over there, that if we just miss out some of the parameters, what happens? Can anyone tell me if I just say, so for example, if I just pass a 10 into that one, what will be my output? Can anyone just let me know? This is the question. And again, this question is here for just for having the understanding that okay, now you are understanding what's going on behind that one. So can anyone please let me know that what will happen if I just run my program right now? Pratham says I'll get a 10. Okay. Anyone else? What should I get? Arshdeep says I'll get a 10. Anyone else? Can I have some more feedbacks from some other guys? Okay, 10. Now let's run this program. So note May 27 .js. You should be surprised to see, because again, that means that you have not seen the last week's lectures. So the output that I get is a NaN. What is this NaN? Remember, this NaN is not a number. It's a special, it's a special thing that comes out when you are trying to combine few things that are like, if you are trying to combine an undefined value with some variable, or maybe you are trying to combine two undefined values. You know what I mean? So why? Because I have just passed one parameter over here, and it says that, okay, the 10 a will catch this 10, but b has undefined. B is undefined. So technically speaking, what is happening over here in that console line is, what is happening over here, that I am saying add 10 plus undefined. You know what I mean? Undefined means because b has not been passed to it. So 10 plus undefined will produce NaN. If it is undefined plus undefined, it will again produce NaN. And NaN is a very interesting thing that we usually check also. If you have studied that one, which I really doubt, that there is even a predefined function is NaN, that you can just run to check whether something is a number or not. Just for example, if I say NaN 12, so is not a number 12 will produce what? Can anyone tell me what it will produce for me? Is NaN 12? Should it produce true or a false? Again, it's a function that would generate a true or a false according to the given value. So it would generate true. Kirandeep says it will generate true. Anyone else? Okay, Ashleep says it will generate true. Now I will literally read this out and then tell me what will happen. Is 12 not a number? Yes, Kirandeep. Yes, Pratham, I think you are right. You are right. Is 12 not a number? What will you say? True or false? So you'll say it's basically no, it's false, because 12 is a number. You know what I mean? In the same way, if I write is NaN and I say ABCD. So what I'm saying literally, I'm saying, is ABC not a number? So what should be the answer? Of course, true, because literally ABC is not a number. So are you getting that one? So please remember that this NaN is coming from where? That actually I have not passed a parameter. So JavaScript is so user friendly that I can just pass one value as well. And if I pass one another value and I say 10, 20, now what will be my output? Can anyone tell me? Of course, now it should be a valid output of 30. Why? Because I passed 10 and I passed 20. And what it does is it just console.logs a plus b, and which is 10 plus 20, which is 30, and it's just producing the 30 over here. You know what I mean? So actually what's happening over here is that the parameters, if you miss out the parameters, it actually never, it really never cares about that. It's not like the C language you are familiar with. C language used to say, if you have defined a function like this, you have to call like this. You remember? If it is accepting two values, it has to accept those two values. You cannot call a function without those two values. Make sense, everyone? So this was something that we have talked about, that okay, missing parameters. And then I talked about the return of a function. And I hope you remember that one. And there was, I think, a test like exam test question as well over there, that if I do something like this, and I'm just giving you because I know some of you have not seen that one, even though I should not be doing that. Now what will be my output if I run this program? Can anyone tell me what will be my output of these two lines? There's a function greeting which is accepting two variables, two values, and then I am calling that inside console.log. Pratham says console.log, and okay, Pratham says 30 and undefined. Anyone else? Pratham might be right. Let's run that one. You see 30 and undefined. I would like to ask this, not to Pratham, to anyone else. Do you understand why it is undefined over here? Why not only 30? Yeah. It's not a question to Pratham because he's already replied. I want to know this from the others. Can anyone tell me why this undefined, where this undefined is coming from? Any idea? It's interesting. Because yeah, exactly, exactly. So Pratham, that's wonderful. I understood that you would know the answer. So Pratham has privately sent me a message, but again, of course, log inside the function. No, Subin, that's not the answer. That's not the answer. Pratham has given the answer in a private chat, and yes, that is correct, of course. But I would like to have answers from, because this looks like that you have not followed. Now see here, when I call this function greeting from here, the greeting is called with two values. Console.log runs and it prints out 30. And the 30 is over here. So far, so good. But then I am calling another console.log, which is looking for a value that is generated from the function. So now if I remove that, am I explicitly return anything? Am I explicitly return anything from this function? Is there anything that I am getting returned from here? There is no return over here, there is no return over here. So if there is no return over here, it means implicitly it always returns an undefined. Does that make sense to everyone? It replaces and it sends undefined, which I have discussed so many times, but just for. So if I say return A plus B, now what will be my output? Pratham, it's not a question to you again. I would like to have others answer. And Subin, thank you very much for answering. But rest of them are not even replying. 30, 30. Yes, you are right. Now you understand that 30, 30. And why 30, 30? Because now I have got 30 coming from this one and 30 coming from the return. Exactly. That's wonderful. Again, it was just an old thing. I wanted to just, tell you about that, because missing parameters or missing what it does with the missing, missing parameters or missing return values. Anyhow, let's talk about something which we have not talked about. So let's talk about, it's basically related to function, and as I said, it's related to our week, this week of study, this third week of study. But again, I would like to just talk about few more interesting things over here. That invoking a function. So remember, we have talked about there are different types of functions. If you have looked at that one, and again you have given the test as well, that invoking a function. So function invoking is typically what, when we are saying that we call the function. And you remember that we have talked about some of the functions that were function expressions, where I was defining those as as basically the function was on one side of the equation, and we were just defining that one. So that was typically one interesting thing over there. But invoking a function or invoking functions is typically something that we need to look at it, because JavaScript is a very different in behavior. JavaScript is very different in behavior. So if I just come over here and if I just define a variable, or if I say again that agreed same function, and I say that it has a console.log and f is running now, right? So I'm just writing a function over here, and I've written down that function into a variable. And you remember I've told you that if you want to call this function, if I just write agreed, right, it might does not produce anything over here. But if you remember, I have done that, or I may have run that in the REPL. And if I run that in the REPL, like the JavaScript REPL, you would really see that, okay, how in action what will happen. So again, if I say var greeting equal to function, so again it's an anonymous function, right? And it does not receive any parameters, for example, and it just has a console statement. So hello from the greeting function, right? So I've just created a function over here. Now, if I just write greeting, I will just get the definition of the function. Why? Because what has been stored in the greeting. Now, greeting is acting like a variable. It's not like that one. So, but if I want to call this function, I'll have to say greeting. So invoke that function. To invoke that function, I'll have to call this with the parenthesis. And I think again, this is something that I have, I have just told you, but here I would like to tell you something more interesting. So now if I just define, if I say something like, for example, if I say var greeting2 is equal to greeting. Interesting. I've defined, so C language, we were never allowed to do such kind of things in C language, because C language strictly used to, first of all, define, define something as a function, and then if you define a function, you cannot play with this line like this. But now see here, when I do something like this, something very interesting happens over here. If I run greeting2 right now, if I call that greeting2, first of all, let's see what is greeting2. If I hit that, can anyone tell me what is this? Of course, it has got exactly the same definition, which was given to greeting. Now both of them can run now like this. You know what I mean? So that's a very, very interesting thing, that your functions might be working like that, right? So function invoke, whenever you want to invoke a function, you need to have these parentheses over there, and these parentheses will basically do what? They will typically invoke a function for you, rather than we cannot just invoke a function somewhere. Now the other thing that I wanted to, so again, this was related to maybe invoking a function. Now other thing that I would like to just talk about here is the scope of variables, or scope of variables in JavaScript. Scope of variables, right? What do you mean by scope of variables? So we have seen that up till now we have been defining variables mostly with var keyword, but we can define variables with let keyword as well, not literal. Oh my god. So let keyword, I can define this with a let keyword, and there is another one, const. And remember, these two, if you talk about these two, the following are like ES6 ways of defining variables. Now there is an important concept that I want to discuss here. That's why I've just mentioned it over here. That we have got this ES6 ways of defining variables, let and const. So I will tell you what does that mean, and what is typically scope of a variable in JavaScript. How do we talk about the scope of a variable in JavaScript? That might be, and there is an important concept of hoisting that we'll talk about, and we will just see that what typically hoisting does for us, and how hoisting typically runs for that one. Okay, so first of all, whenever we define a var variable, remember one thing, very important one thing that you might not be familiar with, is that whenever we define a variable with var, it has a function scope, or where it has been defined, its scope is like that. You know what I mean? It has a function scope, and on the other hand, in C language, if you remember that we used to define a variable like int or something, it used to have a block level scope. Whatever block you define that function in, it used to have that same exact scope, and scope was not going outside of that. But in JavaScript, when we define a variable, the variable always has a function level scope, and by function level scope, it means that it is typically available for all the functions or wherever it has been defined. Now let's come back over here. There is nothing over here, and now let's talk about this, or rather, first of all, let's talk about that in the REPL, and I'll show you what this do in the REPL. So if I say var a, I've defined a variable a, and this a will be available in the global scope. Right now there is no function, there is nothing, but this a is being defined, so it means it will be globally available for everything. Now JavaScript has a very interesting behavior. If I say b is equal to hello, now what has happened? Interestingly, I have just said b is equal to hello, and JavaScript allows me to just do something like this. But what it does, it tries to find out that whether this b was defined anywhere, and if it was not defined, JavaScript creates by itself. Is that making sense to you? It automatically does what? It automatically creates a variable, and I'll show you this example over here. So for example, if I have a function, for example, function ABC, and I'm not defining a variable. Rather, I'm saying, for example, as I said, first of all, if I define a variable var a or var x, right? So is this x has a function level scope. This will be only available into this function. You know what I mean? This x will be available in this function. And if I define a value to this x, if I say x equal to 10, right? So now this has been defined, like a variable has been defined over here. And now let's try to run this one and see if it rather I should say console.log, and I want to print the value of x. Now the discussion that we have, will it give me a value or no? Any answer? Should it give you a value? No, it says that x is not defined. And why? I've been keep on saying, yes, you are right, Karandeep. I've been keeping on saying that this x is a variable level of scope, and variable level of scope it is defined. Sorry, function level. So this var is a function level. So this inside this function it will be available, but outside of this function it will never be available. You know what I mean? I cannot call x over here. Now, what about if I take this statement inside and I run that? You see that, of course, I've not called this function. I can call this function, and this will print as the x the value. You see that it's printing up that. Why? Because now I have taken my console statement inside that. But I want to show you something else. I just take it out again. Now, if I do something like this, a very interesting fact. I'm not defining var. I'm not defining the var variable. Rather, I'm just assigning it a value. X is equal to 10. You know what I mean? Just giving a typical value to this one. And see what happens. Let's run this program. Okay, what it says. Okay, just give me a second. Does it run now? Okay, yeah. So see here, what happens is that usually what happens that, let me just show you. If we give a value to a variable like this, what JavaScript usually used to do before, that JavaScript will look for this defined variable. It will try to find out where this variable x has been defined in this scope. It is not defined. It is just given a value. Like, you know, it's just initialized. But where it has been defined. So JavaScript used to do before that, it used to just define that variable over here by itself technically. And if it is defined over there, you see, now it has become a global variable. Now it has become what? A global variable. And if I just, you know, see over here and I run that one, it is showing undefined. And why it is showing undefined? Because this is the x value, the 10, which was assigned to it, was at that particular scope for that value. It won't be available over here. You know what I mean? I've defined the variable outside. So it's a global variable because it's globally accessible. But the problem is that it was basically a function was there. That function was just changing the value of this x is equal to 10. And now if I just access this x, which is a global value, which was a global variable. Now let's do a very interesting thing. If I just call this ABC, let's see if that changes the value. So you see what happened? Unless you call that function, it is basically defined over there. But of course, since this function was not called, the value was not given. But I can now access this x outside of that. Why? Because x has been defined globally. So I will call this function as a global x, right? Is that making sense? That it would be typically called as what? Global variable. So x has a function level scope. You have to remember just a statement. Var has a function level scope wherever it is defined. So by function level, since right now it has been defined as a globally, so it would have a global scope into that one. Now another interesting situation. It will make it a comment. Okay, if I just do that, x is equal to 10, and I come over here and I say var x. You know what I mean? What I've done? I have just defined a variable x, but first I have given the value and then I have defined this one. You know what I mean? Let's come over here and console it inside that one, just to check what happens. Now, if I call, now I need to call this function, right? So if I call this function, see what happens. It says 10. Do you see a very weird behavior? What is happening? It is typically doing what? It is, even though I have defined the variable later on and given the value before, but remember what it does. whenever we give a value to this one, and so what JavaScript does, JavaScript looks for the value. Okay, it says that, okay, I will find its definition somewhere. It will just go at the top, it does not find. And when it comes to the second line, it says, okay, this is the definition. So what it does technically, I'll show you diagrammatically. When it finds the definition, it says that variable was already used. So it will take this statement, technically speaking, to over here, and it will say, okay, now this var x was supposed to be over here, which is right now we'll consider that we have done a mistake, but compiler will do what? It will just take it over here. And this process of taking the variable over here is called hoisting. Is that making sense to you? I'll just write down that hoisting, and I'll show you what is that. Hoisting. What is this hoisting? It's basically, you know, if we have, like, you know, if we have just defined a variable after it was just, you know, if after it was used like that, so it does what? Technically speaking, it just cuts it from this area. You know, technically speaking, the code understands, okay, you wanted to write that. So taking this variable and again understanding it on the top of it, it's technically, in the technical terms, the deep technical terms, it is called that you have hoisted a variable, hoisting a variable. You know what I mean? So this is called hoisting. Variable has been declared later on. It was used, like, you know, it was used before, it was given a value before, but now what has happened is that now we have our value has gone on the top. Is that right? So this is called hoisting. Hoisting is what? A function of a variable being hoisted, being taken to the top. Why? Because it was, you know, you can say that it was defined later on, but it was used before. So just take it off, take it above. Okay, now another very interesting example. So for example, let's say we have var string, any string we have, and let's give it a value. S is equal to hello, hello. Right, so I've just defined an S is equal to hello. Now if I come over here and see what I want to do, I say for var I equal to 0, I plus I less than 10, you know, this for loop, I plus plus. Now I want to tell you something very interesting, and you want to do something over here, right? Something, whatever you want to do over here. Now my question up till this discussion, what we have done, the discussion till now, will this I accessible outside of this bracket? If you remember in C language, we used to say that, okay, whenever a variable has been declared over here, it should not be accessible outside of this one. So I should not be accessible out of it. Is that right? But let's see what happens. You are right. The no answer should be the right answer. But let's see what JavaScript does for us. If I say I, right, I'm outside of that one, right? And let's call this function. You know what is this 10? Now, let me just, you know, because 10 has been entered multiple times, let me make it 5. So you see, I is 5. It is showing me I. So remember that this is very important concept. As I have been saying you, var is never defined as a scope of, you know, block level. Var is always defined as a function level. So if you find this I, it will go and over there and it will try to find if this I has been defined in this function level, or there is called the chaining that I'll talk about. It will just, you know, look for. So if it find, okay, var is been defined over here, it is a function level variable, whether it is defined inside this for or whether it is defined anywhere. Pratham, are you getting that? This is very interesting. That's why I just use this statement that this var, if you use that like this, it will be declared for whole function. It will not be for the block. Now, interestingly, that the other one that I was talking about, if I do this let, I would not need to make you understand now. If I just run this program, you'll see that what happens. You see that I is not recognized. Now, are you understanding that whenever let is used, the variable is always the block level scope. It will only be available in that block. Are you getting that? Like the same behavior that C language used to exhibit, that if you define a variable like this, it should be only accessible in that block, but the block level. So let, if you do a let, for example, if I come over here and I define this let, let s, and s is equal to hello, right? S is equal to hello. And now if I ask you that, typically speaking, this is a block level variable let, which is available in this block, complete block from this point to this point. You know what I mean? It is only available in this. So it will be available in this block, but outside of this block, it won't, it might not be available. As we have seen that I was not available over there. Right. So that's a very interesting fact over here, because we have seen that in C language, and we are the used to of C language. C language does not used to do that, like at least with the var variable that I'm talking about. So from now onwards, you might see, and I'm talking to every section, that from now onward you might see that I will be using mostly let over there. And now in good modern day programming, most of the JavaScript programmers, they prefer let over var, because and there are multiple other reasons as well. But that is typically what that we are basically looking for. These days we usually use this let rather than anything else. Is that clear to everyone? Okay. So now, as I was talking about, again, that hoisting concept, or automatic declaring concept. I would like to talk about that as well. So, for example, if I have okay, yes, no problem. Someone is trying to go for work. Go that, no problem. Function f. I have a function f, and I say x equal to 2. Again, I'm not declaring it. I'm just I'm just giving a value to it. Return x plus 1. So this is the function that will return x plus 1. Right? And now I'll call this function. So for example, I say var r equal to f function. Right? And so let's print this r as well. Console.log. You might be thinking, what's going on? I have not declared the variable var. So the thing that I was telling you the other time, when it sees that x is equal to 2 and x has not been defined, there is no var. This is called the concept of chaining. What is the chaining? That it will start looking at its parent level. So for example, it say, okay, x is equal to 2, x would be defined somewhere. So first of all, it looks in this scope, or it does not find the var has been defined. So what technically does, at runtime, compiler, what does is, compiler does something like this, which we do not see, but compiler has done exactly the same thing. It says, okay, it means that if it is not there, I will define it by myself. Pratham, are you getting that? It looks like very weird behavior. So again, it's not there. I cannot see that. But if you see that, it has practically done that, because it's giving me the output, even though I have not declared a variable. So it's a bad practice not to define a variable again. But internally, what compiler has done, compiler has automatically created a variable x over here. Is that clear? And technically speaking, this x becomes a global variable, by the way. Why? Because it was not in the scope of this. It was not defined in the scope of this. Rather, compiler itself generated it. So it becomes a global variable sort. Is that right? Okay. Now let's talk about that again, a bit about that hoisting that I've been talking about. This is the variable declaration, and it just takes those variable declarations. Now let's talk about another very important. So the hosting, you remember, if you have not declared something and use that, the JavaScript will hoist it and it will take it to the top. Now see here what we are doing. So if I call a function, now see here, this function is not created. There is nothing above. So everything is covered, right? Deadlines. So I have a function, and I will define a function over here. Function f. Now, do you see some discrepancy over here? I'm defining function but later on, but first I'm calling that one. So here what will happen again? When I call this function from this point, it will start looking the definition of this function f. It will go, for example, and find out, okay, it says it's the definition is over here, and it will take this definition, it will hoist this definition over there. Is that making sense to everyone? This is very important concept. It will hoist this definition and will say, okay, I found this f and I'll execute this f. So JavaScript never minds that if you have in C language, if you had not defined a function and you want to call that function, you were never able to do so. Remember, in C language, you were never able to do. But JavaScript does what? But JavaScript hoists that one, and it will say, okay, f is there. So now let me show you. If I have, for example, a console.log statement over here, hello from f, right? So it just gives hello from f function. And now if I run that one, you see it is running. Interesting, isn't that? Because I'm calling function first and then defining it. JavaScript won't mind it. And believe you me, when we'll be making our web applications, you will find this very helpful, because we will be doing something of that kind, that we would have, like, file will be accessed, like function will be accessed later on, but it will be defined, accessed before and it will be defined later on, but it will still work because JavaScript will doing hoisting for us. And now if I call this again, you think that it will be called again? It will be called twice now. This is quite simple. Yes, now it will be called twice. It is called from there and hoisted this definition over there and call both of them. Now let's take another scenario. There is a function, for example, G. I'm calling a function G, right? And now I'm defining this var G is equal to function, and let's print hello from G, right? From G function. So var G is equal to hello from function, hello from G, right? So we were looking at that it does hoisting, but let's see what it will do over here. It does not run that one. Now, you know why it's not, now it's doing that? G declaration can be hoisted. Like again, if G was not declared, it could be hoisted over there. But remember that assignment of this G will never be hoisted. You remember over here what we did? We said that x is equal to 2, or for example, we saw this example firstly, that we just defined defined a variable over there. So assignment is not hoisted, rather the definition is hoisted. So it will try to call that one. But of course, this function has not been defined. And over here, so I'll just write over here. Why it won't work? It won't work. It won't work since G's declaration will be hoisted, but not the assignment. So G's declaration can be hoisted. If I just define var G, so G can be hoisted. But if you have assignment something, like again, if you have made a function expression, it won't be hoisted. And you remember that how it would be hosted, for example, hoisted. And in our previous example, we have seen that if I just remove this, rather than making a function declaration, if I come over here and I just define a G over here, now it will be hoisted. Oh, space G. Right. So now let's see that. You see, now it is hosted. So remember, function itself will be hosted, but if you have declared, if that's a variable that has an assignment will not be automatically hosted. Is that making sense to everyone? Okay, can I get some feedback from some? Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move forward and let's discuss few more important concepts related to functions and related to all those things that I have talked about. So now this is the concept that we are talking about. Hoisting we have just talked about, that taking the variables, and if that. So now overwriting variables in child scope. When a variable has been defined in a child scope, how it can be overridden. Now, there is a very interesting example. Again, I'm just taking this example from your notes, and we'll talk about this one. Now, this is one example over here, and we'll talk about this. This is a very interesting interesting concept over here that we would like to discuss over here. Okay. Now another weird thing has come over here. What is that? That we are having a function. We are having a function inside another function. This looks more weird again because we have never seen that before as well. Never seen language programmer. Now what is happening over here? Let's see. There is a function called parent. And inside that function, we have var x is equal to 2, a local, a function level variable has been declared. And you see there is a variable been declared globally as well, var x is equal to 1. So there is a new declaration of var. So x is declared again. Then there is a function inside this function child, which is accepting x as a parameter, and it's just printing this x. Now let's see that what will be outputted over here. And let's talk about how it is outputted. Okay, if I call my parent, I've not called anything. If I call parent, and let's see what comes out, and I'll show you the whole definition because I want to discuss something very, very interesting. You see the output is 3. Now see what is happening and what is that child level scope or the variable hosted. So first of all, when I call this child, you see, when I call this parent function is called. Now, remember, there is this x, which is of global scope. Globally scoped a variable, x is equal to 1, we have that. Then we have another var x is equal to, we have defined another one, and it is a function level scope. Function level scope. This variable has a function level scope, right? And then if you talk, there is another function, and this x, which has been passed, is a parameter. And remember, this parameter, when you talk about, again, we are passing this x over there. So this parameter is a variable for this location. So in that content, in that sequence, if we just come over here, and if we say that it will, so this is the x that has been passed over here, and this x we are printing over there. Now, if you see here, when I pass this 3 to this, over here we have passed this 3. So it means that when I call this parent function, x is declared as 2. This function comes, and again, this when we call this function, then after defining, so we pass 3 to this one. So x becomes 3. So that's why it just shows me 3. But again, if I ask you, when I called this function, what was the value of x? It was 2 at that time, because I was calling this function var x is equal to 2. But there is a this child function, which it basically does what? It overrides x in parent and uses 3. You know what I mean? I have just passing this x, and now it is just showing me x, and the value is basically 3. Is that making sense to everyone? Why? Because I have just said 3. So it says, okay, now x value is 3, and it just prints 3. Now the again, globally x value was 1, but when I call this function, x value becomes, when I call this function, x value became 2. But then I call this child function, which is just even overriding that one. Why? Because we have been passing this value, and this value will overtake all these previous values. Now, if I just do something like this, can you tell me what will be the output now? What I will get as output over here? 3, 2, or 1? Anyone? What will be the output now? Will it be 3? Will it be 2? Will it be 1? Because now I have just taken out this x from here. Okay, Kirandeep says 2. Pratham says 3. Pratham, why 3? Oh, okay, you say 2 again. So you are saying 2. Let's run this one. Now, why 2? We need to just think about it. Why 2? Pratham, can you tell me why it's just now printing 2 rather than 3? Var x is equal to, yeah, exactly. The function level 2 will be used. There is no argument over here. I am passing this, but of course there is no accepting argument over here. So it will just accept that one. Okay, that's wonderful. Now what about this? If I pass x over here, what will be the output now? If I pass x over here, Pratham says 2 again. Kriti says 2. Yes. So same is x is equal to. Why? Because now it is just, I'm just passing this x because x has not been changed over here. I'm just passing this x and this x is returned over here, and it will show me that, okay, now you have got that variable, right? That's a wonderful thing. Now, what about this? If I take away this definition, I make it comment. Now, what will be my output? I have made this comment. See that. So there is no declaration over here. Let's see. Pratham says 1. So now what will be the output? Because one has been found over there. That's wonderful. So this is called chaining. So Kiranti, this is called chaining. X, it will look for the value of X. It will go over there. It does it. So again, it will go parent to parent to parent to parent. So first of all, this child will look at that. Is that X defined over here? No, there is no X defined over here. Go to the top parent. Is there any X defined over here? No, the X is not defined. Okay, go to the parent. Is there any X defined there? Yes, there is a value, and it will accept that value. You know what I mean? And that's a wonderful thing. Now tell me, everyone, what will be the output now? This is chaining. Chaining. X will look for the values over here, not found. Over here, not found. Over here, not found. What should be the output now? That's wonderful. It has to be undefined, or it's basically, it's not even recognizing this X. It says, what is this X? I don't know. So for example, it's technically speaking, if I just even call this child even, and I want to print this X, let's do that. I'll just take it because it is just not recognizing that one. So if I just do that, okay, still it says that, what says that X is not defined, or X is not defined. It says that I even do not recognize this X, because X has never been defined over there. So because there is no X. Sorry, like again. But you see, if it is defined at any level, you see it will go and find that level. Are you understanding the chaining? So if I just take it away again, this global, I take it away and I just define this local one. And again, now it will just go to the chain, and the first chain it will find 2, and we just accept that 2, and it will print that. Right. So I think this is everyone is with me, and everyone is getting that one, right? That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Okay. Okay. So then in the last week, I've talked about the string functions, and the different string functions that we have. You have seen those string functions. You have seen those array functions that I have talked about, and you can always do those practices for that functions. The WEEK3 components that we have, for each we have talked about. We have not talked about the map, but I can just we'll be just looking into some examples, and we can just talk about those one. And how about this regular expressions? Were you able to see that that typical video that I talked about, that on the regular expressions that I shared with everyone? Did you have a chance to look at that one? Because I would like you to just look at that one, this video. So brother, were you able to see? Brother, you have seen that? Okay. So I would like you to just have a look at that one. This is very interesting one. Regular expressions, complete regular expressions. I just discussed how would you do that. Even though some of you say that you have studied that when we were in some of the programming classes, or some the Unix class or Linux class, but you will find it very interesting, and all the problems that we see on these practice questions that you see, those practice questions make use of all of these kind of things, and you can always you can always work on them, and you can always come up with the solutions of those questions. Right. So these were the few things that I want to talk about. I would like to talk about the hoisting of the variables. We have talked about some of the important aspects of it, and for this week we have just typically these these topics, and we have talked about strings. And again, one of the things that is included in your notes, if I just show you for this week 3, was that as I talk about all these string functions, you have to just make use of these string functions. And if you remember my last class, where I have just given the usage of these functions, how to use those functions, and how to just find out some typical string from a particular one, and all those things. And then array properties, we have talked about array push and pop. And then we have talked about, if you see over there, we have talked about the There are certain elements, shift and unshift, that we use. Array includes elements. So you have to just make all these things. And as I talked about this regular expression, I've just given this just the shared video for those who have just joined us. This video has all that related to regular expressions that is there. So I would leave you today with this video, and then I would like you to just go with this practice exercise. If you get time other than from your assignment, you can just always go through. And by the way, the next week the test will be from this week 3 components, right? So you can just look at these components. So you will be asked from these components, week 3 notes. So the next test, like test 2, that every week now you will have a test, and this test 2 will be from this week's components, this week 3 component. And regular expressions, the video that I have shared with you, it would be very much included, and would just it would ask you that your concept, that do you know that how to just do that regular expression kind of thing. So which you oversee over there, how to just check for different patterns, for the phone number patterns, for the email patterns, and for all those strings and everything. You will need to just mention that, okay, about those things. So you can just look at those problems and those kind of things. Is it fine? So I will just keep myself with this point, and I have just given you again a video to watch, and it would be part of today's lecture. It was rather the part of the first part as anyhow. But again, if you have seen that, so I'm just mentioning here for everyone, like those who are looking at the recording as well, that our test 2 will be from this week 3, this all week 3 that I'm been showing, regular expressions, that is string functions. So you need to just prepare according to that one. So these functions will be asked over there, and you can have a look at the lectures today, like today's lecture as well, and the last week's lecture, where I've just discussed about the strings and arrays. And you will be definitely, so this week's lectures are important for you, and you will be asked from these kind of things. Any question? I know, Pratham, you have a question, and I'll stay here, and I'll take your question now after stopping recording. But if anyone else has a question related to today's topic, or maybe anything else, you can just stay here, because some students have questions, and I'll just like discuss with them. But if you don't have any question, I'll just pause the recording for a second. Or if you want me to discuss anything, I'll just